So today we're going to talk about periods, PMS, perimenopause. We're talking about all of them together because it's actually, even though you may be at completely different phases of your life cycle, working with periods and PMS, or if you're in that irregular phase known as perimenopause, moving into the menopausal transition, the dietary and lifestyle strategies impacting these processes is actually really similar. And so from this perspective, I think it makes sense to talk about supporting them universally. As I say every time we do one of these, do yourself a favor. We're going to be here for about 25 to 30 minutes. So just do what it takes to remove distractions, be present, give yourself this time. Whatever it is that you're not paying attention to in the next 25 minutes, we'll be there for you when you come back. So be fully present now. For those of you who are new to me, either watching the recording or here, I am Dr. Dawn DeLilly. I'm a naturopathic physician in Missoula. I've been practicing for about 13 years. The last 6.5 of them have been here in Montana. And my practice is really focused on hormonal balance, mood, metabolism, and digestion. One of the things that actually makes me really excited about this particular topic that we're diving into today is that a lot of times I actually get the question, like, why do you work with digestion, metabolism, and hormones? They seem so unrelated. And I hope that by the end of this presentation, you've actually have a deeper understanding of how they're all very interconnected. So I think, by the end of today, you'll kind of have a better idea of like why this grouping even exists in my head. And so here's what you're actually going to learn. This is the kind of the order of events on our agenda today. The first thing we're going to do is introduce you to the players, because most women think that periods, PMS, this life transition called perimenopause is solely influenced by what's happening like as part of their reproductive health. And part of what I want to help you understand today is that there are many systems in your body that are impacting whether or not this process is going well or whether or not it's deeply uncomfortable. Then next, we're going to talk about the lifestyle and nutrition choices that impact the whole system. And by that, I mean negatively impact. Like what are the things that people are doing that tend to make PMS and perimenopause miserable? And then we're going to conclude with talking about how to support the system as a whole. So here, meet the players, right? As I said before, I think that too many women think of their periods, their PMS, and the menopausal transition as being solely reproductive, which is why we've got this image here that is suggestive of the uterus, fallopian tubes, and ovaries. But what I hope you understand by the end of our time together, oops, went too far, is that at the very least, right, the adrenals are involved. The organs of detoxification are involved. And for our conversation, we're focusing on the liver, the large intestines, and the skin. And number 3, right, is the ovaries. I have listed these in what I consider to be the order of importance, right? So again, for people living through this, all of my patients would probably think, oh, my ovaries are number 1 in this process. And what I want to help you understand is that they're impacted hugely by these other things. So let's talk a little bit about why and what this means, right? So your adrenal glands, which are about the size of a walnut and located right above your kidneys, produce a variety of hormones. So some of them are called catecholamines. This is epinephrine, norepinephrine. These are the hormones that have us respond immediately to the stresses in our life. They make our heart rate go faster. They constrict our blood vessels. Right? So when we feel that racy sense, it's because of the catecholamines. But the adrenals also produce cortisol, probably the most famous of the adrenal hormones these days. And what I want you to recognize is that cortisol shares a precursor with progesterone. So when your body is making a tremendous amount of cortisol because of chronic ongoing stress, your body is making less progesterone, often. And when your body is making less progesterone, the balance between estrogen and progesterone is deeply impacted, meaning that stress, particularly chronic, ongoing stress, the kind of stress that leaves us feeling a little bit hopeless and with a sense of despair, which is really what happens when we are, when our cortisol levels are high, has a direct impact on how our bodies experience our normal monthly cycles. The other thing that is produced through the adrenals is DHEA. And DHEA is the precursor to both testosterone and estrogen. So again, when your adrenals are continuously taxed due to prolonged acute stress and or chronic stress, then the precursors generated through all of that stress begin to deplete, and then the reproductive hormones suffer. So when the adrenals suffer, sooner or later, the reproductive cycle will suffer. And then understanding organs of detoxification. So the liver, we're going to look at first, because while the liver does not have anything to do with the production of your reproductive hormones, it has everything to do with the metabolism and clearance of those hormones. So your body is going to produce a certain amount of estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone, and then it's your liver's job to clear that. And if your liver is not doing that well, then these hormones will begin to accumulate in your body and in your tissues. And so even with normal ovarian production, we can often have the experience of high levels of hormones, either because your liver is not clearing them or because in the clearance process, it is producing a version of that hormone that feels very potent. So particularly with estrogen, when your body makes estrogen, your liver, the first step that your liver takes is to put an OH group, a hydroxy group, in either the 2, the 4, or the 16 position. I promise I won't bore you with a lot of chemistry. What I want you to know is that a healthy liver will produce lots of the 2 position. This is beneficial. The 4 position is the most concerning because of the predisposition to cancers, but the 16 position is the most potent. So I work with many women who have normal levels of estrogen, but they feel estrogen dominant because their liver is making a lot of the 16-OH estrogen in the clearance pathway. And so when that happens, they're experiencing the breast tenderness, the bloating, the weight gain, and the mood swings that we often refer to as PMS. So that can happen either because we produce lots of estrogen and very little progesterone, or because of the type of estrogen we produce. And that's why we're talking about the organs of detoxification. The next most important organ of detoxification in this sense is the large intestines. One, because when your intestines are very inflamed, that impacts your hormone production. But also because constipation is very common. And when your bowels are not moving consistently, your body has the opportunity to reabsorb the hormones that it is trying to clear, and it ends up recycling them, again, which leads to the accumulation in circulation and has huge impacts on the experience of PMS. So the mood swings, the pain, the breast tenderness, and for those of us, or for those of you experiencing the potential for hot flashes or vaginal dryness, right? It can be very disruptive to our estrogen levels at any given time. So very, very difficult to bring balance to the system without first making sure that the bowels are moving regularly. And I bring up the skin, not because it's directly involved with the process, but because it's directly impacted by the process. So a lot of the women that I work with who are either in the late stages of cycling or beginning perimenopause will begin to experience acne all over again. And that is oftentimes an indication that either the liver and or the large intestines are not working very well, right? So when our toxins are not cleared through the pathways with which they were intended, we will start metabolizing through the skin, which can be very uncomfortable. So the skin's really, I'd say, an indicator of what's happening. but it can also be a route of elimination. So sauna is one of the practices that can really support detoxification. And that is like we're opening up the emunctory pathways, the sweating and the lymphatic system, which happens through the skin. And then, like I said, finally, the ovaries. The ovaries are the part of your body that will make the estrogen and testosterone. You know, it's actually the egg being released that produces progesterone. But again, you'll see this more and more as we move through. That is a function of the health and integrity of the adrenals and the organs of detoxification. It does not happen independently. So from there, let's talk about what lifestyle and dietary choices completely overwhelm this system. You're probably not surprised that we're going to start off with sugar and processed food, but we're going to talk about them differently because in my opinion, they actually have two really distinct impacts. So one, with sugar, what I want you to recognize is that it is the job of your adrenal system to keep your blood sugar balanced. So your adrenals work in conjunction with insulin, but the glucocorticosteroid, which is cortisol, plays a huge role in your blood sugar staying stable. So when you have a high sugar or a high carbohydrate diet, your adrenals are constantly being taxed in their effort to keep the balance. And the more taxed your adrenals are, the less available they are to either generate the precursors of normal cycling, or more commonly, when women are starting to go through the perimenopausal transition and the ovaries are doing what they are intended to do, which is reduce their production of hormones, the adrenals are not available to pick up the slack. They cannot support your body in making this transition smoother if they are constantly working to maintain other aspects of homeostasis. So the more stress you put on them, the less available they are to do other work. With processed food, there are really two considerations. One, processed food often has a lot of preservatives and chemicals, which is putting a tremendous amount of burden on your liver. And again, the more the liver is working to handle processed food, the less available it is for normal pathways of detoxification, like your hormones. And secondarily, processed food is so replete in nutrients that, you know, when we get to the next section and I start talking about these essential nutrients for healthy hormonal function, you're just not getting what your body needs. And so the more processed food you're eating, which often is sweet food, you're stressing your body in three distinct and cumulative ways. Too much sugar putting a strain on the adrenals, all the chemicals putting further strain on the liver, and you're undermining your body's ability to function by robbing it of key nutrients necessary for normal function. Then alcohol. So here you'll see in the parentheses, especially wine and beer. And interestingly, for two different reasons, right? Beer has a lot of estrogenic properties because of the hops. So for some people, drinking large amounts of beer can disrupt hormonal systems. It's one of the reasons why men who drink beer can sometimes have gynecomastia, like enlarged breast tissue, because of the hormonal impact specifically associated with hops. But I bring up wine because my observation over the last 12 to 13 years is that wine is particularly disruptive for hot flashes. Women who have tolerated wine most of their lives tend to reach their 40s and find that red wine in particular is a recipe for hot flashes. And so I think this has a lot to do with the tannins in wine. Not 100% sure, but for those of you who do drink, I want to encourage you to experiment occasionally with either vodka, tequila, or something else. Like if you're going to have the drink, then potentially avoiding or limiting the wine and the beer can have a really big impact on that threshold of hot flashes. Whatever you drink, though, recognize that alcohol is going to put a burden on your liver. It's going to ask your liver to do a lot of alcohol detoxification and metabolism, which plays into the aspects that we talked about earlier. And there is one other aspect of alcohol that I think is often overlooked and has a really big impact on hot flashes in general. And that is that our bodies are completely unable to store the calories consumed through alcohol. We have processes where we can store calories consumed through carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. But any caloric intake that comes through alcohol, we're unable to store, which often means that the consumption of alcohol is very disruptive to sleep. The reason being is that when you consume alcohol, your body, one, will shut down burning all other fuel sources, but your metabolism will run hot until you have discharged all of the caloric energy that comes through alcohol, because it must keep running until that is burned off. So oftentimes, if somebody has a glass or two, of an alcoholic beverage, often wine, then all night long their sleep is not restorative, and hot flashes run heavy. So again, this is one of these multifaceted things. Your liver is impacted, oftentimes your blood sugar is impacted, and your metabolism becomes briefly supercharged, meaning that your core body temperature cannot drop, so you won't sleep deeply, and you're already closer to that threshold, that tipping point where you feel hot all night. So as we get older, our tolerance of alcohol tends to drop. Beyond that, I do want to encourage any of you to listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast on alcohol consumption. It is from, I think, August 22nd of last year. It might be episode number 85, but I did not verify that before this before this workshop. Look for Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab, alcohol. One thing that we probably all need to get really honest about is that historically, the medical recommendations on what is safe alcohol consumption is rapidly changing. We used to say that one drink per night, 5 to 7 drinks for an average size female is okay. And 1 to 2 drinks per night, 10 to 14 drinks for the average size man in a week is okay. And what we are now recognizing is that the impact on brain health from that level of alcohol consumption is both pronounced and prolonged. I recommend that my patients have no more than 2 to 3 alcoholic drinks in a month, not in a week. And so I just want to encourage you to dig a little bit deeper into what is healthy alcohol consumption at any phase of life. Sleep. I'm not going to go a ton into sleep, but sleep has a huge impact on adrenal function. And we've talked about why that impacts ovarian function and stress, right? So we all live in a world in which stress is ongoing. And so I'm actually just going to bookmark that one for now. When we start to talk about lifestyle changes that work, then we'll talk about what to do with stress, because stress really has 2 components. It is the stressor and the prolonged impact of the stress itself in our body, and we need to address those differently. But I think we all understand what stress is, and so I'll move forward for now. Okay, so then that leaves us with, how do we actually support this system? And as you might suspect, for a lot of these things, it's just going to be the positive opposite of the things that we talked about in the last slide. But I do want to bring more nuance into this conversation. So when I say eat a balanced, whole foods and seasonal diet, I want to encourage you to think about this from a variety of perspectives. So balanced meaning a reasonable for your body balance between carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. The overwhelming majority of Americans today eat way too many carbohydrates, and refined carbohydrates at that. And the majority of people don't eat enough fat. When they do eat fat, it's a lot of fake processed crap. So that's where balanced and whole foods come together. So when I say balanced, I do mean that it's both nutrient dense and that it has a reasonable balance for your body. And I say for your body because your age, your weight, your activity levels will all influence what your body tolerates in terms of carbohydrate intake. Whole foods, really what I'm trying to say here is eat foods in their natural state. You can have the perfect ratio of carbohydrates, protein, and fat, but if it's coming from protein drinks, snack bars, and I don't know, like some sort of like weird, creepy, like you've got salad dressing that's got soybean oil in it, you're not doing your bodies any favors, right? So you really want foods in their most natural states possible. And then I am a big fan of seasonal eating. So as I mentioned before, I'm here in Montana. It's April, like the snow is thawing, but there is no fruit available in Montana that did not get shipped from faraway tropical places, which means that the fruit that is available in your grocery stores right now was picked underripe, probably sprayed with something en route, and then now it's on your shelves. So I really encourage people to think about dietary variety as an annual cycle, not a weekly cycle. Do not concern yourself with the idea that you had carrots on Monday, so you've got to have peppers on Tuesday and green beans on Wednesday to have a varied diet. Instead, think these are the foods that are readily available in my locale in the winter, which will be different than foods that are available in the spring, which are different than foods that are available in the summer, and different than foods that are available in the fall. So if you're going to eat fruit, it makes sense to me that you'd probably do it in late summer or early fall when the fruit is on the trees. During the winter, we naturally gravitate towards a very simple diet, a bit more meat, maybe some root vegetables. We're having some stews. And that is also a time for meal consolidation. I recommend that a lot of my patients eat 1 or 2 meals a day during the winter because we are more sedentary. And then as the activity level picks up in spring and summer, you'll eat more carbohydrates and have more fresh variety. So think about that. Limiting the alcohol, I talked about that before. At the most, maybe a drink a week, particularly if you are suffering from PMS or hot flashes, to really recalibrate the relationship to alcohol, where it's 1 to 3 drinks a month, not a drink a night. And then particularly noticing your correlation to, like, can I tolerate wine? Can I tolerate beer? What works for me? And, as somebody who has long enjoyed a glass of red wine, like having to come to terms with the fact that like my body doesn't like it anymore wasn't the easiest, but, just paying attention. When I do this, here's what my body does, honoring that, and then being willing to make some changes around that. Sleep is essential to keep the entire body working together. And then this piece I do want to go into quite a bit, supporting yourself through stress. So I mentioned this before. There are stressors. These are the things in our life that cause us stress. The boss that is a jerk, the partner who doesn't listen, the financial situation that's difficult to navigate, or if you're like me, the teenager who talks back, right? Like these are the stresses or the stressors. But the stressors actually exist independently of the stress itself. And oftentimes, this is something that I see with a lot of women, is that they will be proactive in reducing the stressors in their life. And then they wonder why a couple months later, like, why am I still tired? Why do I still have PMS? Or why do I have hot flashes? And that's because the impact of the stress itself has not been processed and metabolized. So as a culture, we need to do a better job of offering opportunities to help people process their stress. One of the things that I have really started doing a lot in my practice is helping people to do things like, this is like all comes out of like somatic experience, where you relive in kind of titrated doses some of those difficult experiences that we had called stressors in the past. Like maybe you think about that interaction with the boss who was a total jerk. And at that time, in order to keep your job, you kept your mouth shut, you put a smile on your face, and you went home and just sort of stewed in how awful that job is. To metabolize that stress later, what you do instead is you allow yourself to complete the cycle. You think about your boss saying what your boss said. And then in the privacy of your own home and the safety of your own container, you give yourself permission to yell, scream, talk back, maybe move your arms like you're punching something, or lying in your bed, move your arms and legs as though you were running, right? But you allow your body to do what it wanted to do in the moment that you stopped it from doing because of social constraint. This is just one example of the ways in which it is essential that we do what we can to reduce the stress and also give our body the opportunity to metabolize the stress itself. Because if we never go back into our body and empty the bucket, right, reduce the impact of that stress, it is still impacting our adrenals, our metabolism, and therefore our reproductive health. The workshop that I did last month on anxiety talks a lot more about some of these tools. So if you want more information about how to metabolize stress, then check that replay. So we talked previously about the lifestyle factors, but I also want to talk about the nutritional factors that impact all of this. So I broke it into systems to make it easy. This first section I think of as either fundamental wellness or kind of multi-system support. And these nutrients here, vitamin D, iron, fish oil, they're all sweet spot nutrients, meaning that too low is very damaging, but so is too much. And so I wanted to make sure that that's clear because toxicity is a possibility. And so while vitamin D, iron, fish oil can all be essential nutrients to bring you into balance, they are not nutrients that I recommend people take at high doses in the long run without regular testing, because you do want to make sure that you're in that Goldilocks place. Then in terms of nutrients that impact the adrenals, vitamin C is often overlooked. So vitamin C we think of as an immune support nutrient, but there's a tremendous amount of overlap in adrenal function and immune health. And per body weight, the adrenals store more vitamin C than any other part of the body. So vitamin C is really important for adrenal health. And then B complex, so B5, particularly important for adrenals, and B6 is very important for detoxification and metabolism of estrogen and other hormones. So B6 and B5, very important, which is why I say B complex, because a lot of people, particularly when they're not feeling great, jump to B12, but the B vitamins all work in concert. So if you're only taking B12, you're almost certainly overlooking some of the essential nutrients found in other places. And then adaptogens. So adaptogens are a class of herbs that help your body adapt to stress. That's why they're called adaptogens. So licorice, rhodiola, ashwagandha, schisandra, ginseng, all fall into this class of herbs called adaptogens. In terms of liver health, some of our big players include milk thistle, artichoke, Jerusalem artichoke, and then ox bile is really helpful. A lot of people that I've seen have their gallbladder removed, and then they start dealing with PMS, digestive issues, or hot flashes, because bile actually plays a really important role in clearing the hormones that are metabolized. Fat-soluble nutrients have to get bound by bile in order to exit the system. So taking a digestive enzyme that has bile can be really helpful. And then bitters. So any of the bitter herbs can really help liver function. In terms of intestinal health, you'll notice here that I say microbial balance and then list both probiotics and antimicrobials. That is because in the last decade, we have seen the popularity of probiotics create a lot of imbalances. People take probiotics. Think of it as that sweet spot, maybe initially helpful and then later on becoming problematic. because then they have an overgrowth of bacteria in the wrong places. And so we have to balance healthy bacteria, but sometimes healthy bacteria can become too much bacteria. And then we're looking at antimicrobials. So things like berberine, other herbs, oregano can help to knock down some of the overgrowth of bacteria. And then I mentioned here betaine HCl. So hydrochloric acid should be readily available in the stomach. And as our food passes through the acid bath of the stomach, that helps to kill external microbes. But that acid also helps to kill and control bacteria in the small intestines where it's really not supposed to be. And so having sufficient acid helps to keep our microbial balance, in check instead of allowing for overgrowth. So a lot of times a missing component in the overall health of the system is that we have insufficient acid, which can come from either a stressed out system or low thyroid function. And then finally, looking at how do we support the ovaries? So DHEA, I mentioned.
I have one quick question on the intestines, if I could, really quick. Sorry.
Sure. No, go ahead.
Is there anything we can look for maybe in our stool to look for a microbial imbalance?
So not necessarily in the stool. Floating stools can sometimes indicate fat in the stool. And so then you're looking at bile, liver function. But what people often notice when they have a microbial imbalance, if it's in the small intestines and they get bloated immediately after eating. So if somebody eats something and then within 20 to 40 minutes, they feel that distension and it's relatively high, like above the navel, that's often an indication or suggestive of either H. pylori in the stomach or SIBO, so it was small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. If somebody experiences significant bloating 90 minutes to 2 hours later, then that's often indicative of a microbial imbalance in the large intestines. Now, all of this needs to be coupled with what did I just eat? If you just ate a ton of Brussels sprouts or broccoli or those, or hummus, like the kinds of foods that are notoriously difficult to digest, it might just be that you had an enzyme imbalance. So somebody that's used to eating legumes can tolerate legumes pretty regularly because their body's making the enzymes necessary to break them down. But if you're not used to eating them, like if you have a diet that's kind of more rooted in simple vegetables and meats, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of black beans or hummus, then it could be, have nothing to do with microbes and just that, your body's no longer making the enzymes necessary for you to break down those particular foods. So it's not always as cut and dry as like, if you have this symptom, that's definitely what's happening. But if there's a pattern of bloating associated with certain meals, then that can be very indicative of a bacterial overgrowth, whether small intestines or large intestines. And then with the reduction of bacteria, like when probiotics are needed, anytime somebody takes an antibiotic, I recommend that they follow with 6 to 8 weeks of a probiotic. Yogurt is not enough. Kimchi is not enough. But when I was in medical school, actually in the micro lab, we tested like how many probiotics are available in like every commercial brand of yogurt that we could find. And we did not find one that had sustainable, measurable amounts of probiotics. So that's where I think people just need to stop kidding themselves about saying like, oh, I had some fermented food. It's like, if you were on an antibiotic, spend 6 weeks on a probiotic and like really restore those levels. So go ahead, Emily, what else did... Sorry, I think we were talking at the same time. Did you have a follow-up question?
Sorry, no, that was it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then honestly, acid, I think that stomach acid is often so helpful because we should have lots of stomach acid. There's no reason that your dog should be able to drink out of the stream. And then if you do, you get really, really sick. That is definitely the world we live in now, right? Because your dog still has stomach acid and most of us don't. But historically, right, before modern civilization, like we drank out of whatever and we didn't get sick all the time. But because of stress, our blood flow moves away from the digestive system. And that is one thing that results in compromised stomach acid. And so when we eat in a stressed out state, when we eat too fast, when we multitask while we eat, those are all things that compromise digestion and can lead to microbial imbalances, as well as really poor absorption and assimilation of nutrients. Okay, and then finally coming to the ovaries. So DHEA is a supplement that I do lean on heavily, but always in very small doses. I will start somebody off at 5 milligrams of DHEA and slowly work the way up. You can buy 25 milligrams over the counter. I think in some cases you can buy higher doses. But while DHEA is often low, I do find that it can be really difficult for some people to take. Like some people, even who have very low DHEA numbers, take DHEA and they get really irritable. And so it's one that I start off with tiny amounts and slowly build up when it's indicated. But because it is a precursor to estrogen and testosterone, it can be really helpful at restoring balance. Chaste tree, also known as Vitex, is an herb that supports production of progesterone. So when somebody has more estrogen relative to progesterone and they need to bring that into balance, chaste tree is our herb of choice. And then evening primrose oil. This is one that I find consistently helps women struggling with PMS. So whether that's breast tenderness, mood swings, painful periods, evening primrose oil from ovulation and to the start of the next period can work wonders. There are lots of herbs that support the estrogen pathway, but I find that they're a little trickier to use. So I didn't mention them here because I do often find that supporting progesterone is enough. And then supporting the other places, supporting the adrenals, giving a little bit of DHEA can often bring the estrogen into balance. Whereas when we're working with black cohosh and other estrogenic herbs, that's something that I'd rather you do with the support of a practitioner. With all of these, I cannot convey strongly enough, they take time. If anybody starts taking support or changing their lifestyle in order to address either PMS or hot flashes, you must be willing to give your body a couple of months to cycle, particularly for PMS. Hot flashes, we can actually address a little bit sooner. But the lifestyle choices that you're making today are impacting the follicle that is released in 2 to 3 months from now, and therefore the hormonal imbalance associated with that. And so if somebody starts taking things and then their next period is still a bear, a lot of times they're like, I'm doing all of this stuff, it's not working. But I do want you to know that you've got to give your body 2 to 3 cycles to come into balance and to really be impacted by what you're doing. So if people don't give a particular therapy enough time, they can often bail before they've had the chance to really find out. So that is the material that we have today. Like I said, I really wanted to give you kind of an overview that this is a multi-system process. Things we do every day can hugely undermine your efforts to bring it into balance, but there are lots of things to do both nutritionally and from a lifestyle perspective that can bring it into balance. So next month, we're going to talk about banishing the bloat. So we're really going to get more into digestive health and microbial balance in May.